Welcome back, everyone. Michael here with Offshore Citizen. Today we're going to discuss a subject that relates to people on a few different ends of the spectrum, and this is the subject of, do you need to form a company? Now, to give some context, I've talked to some people who are maybe freelancers, there may be people who are digital nomads, who are workers, etc. Then I've talked to people who are investors. And so you've kind of got these two spectrums. Obviously, some people already have a company, and so that's fairly straightforward. But if you're somebody who is an investor, or if you're somebody who is self-employed, a digital nomad, remote worker, etc., then this topic is going to be for you. I'm going to cover kind of the benefits, the drawbacks, when it makes sense, when it doesn't make sense, what types of companies, how those companies might play into what's useful. So before we do that, if you haven't already, please hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell. I really appreciate your support. We're working on growing the channel, producing great content for you every day. Please go and check out some of the other videos. And if you'd like help with international tax optimization, asset protection, forming companies, opening bank accounts, going and getting residency permits or citizenships, figuring out which one is best for you, please reach out to me. You can book a call, calendly.com/Michael-Rosmer. There's a link in the description below, or send a message through our websites, offshorecitizen.net or offshorecapitalist.com. Okay, so the people I think who we'll start with here is we'll start with people who are kind of on the digital nomad side. And so the whole point is, obviously some people, you're working on your own, you aren't in a situation necessarily where you're going to be employing other people, so that's not a big deal. And you're probably not earning a huge amount of income. It's not like you're earning millions or something like that. So you might be in a situation where you say, well, maybe I don't need a company. Maybe it's easier just not to have one. Now, pros and cons, I think it really depends on the situation that you're in. So we're going to talk about a few different cases. The first one is from the standpoint of relocating somewhere, okay? I did a video yesterday on getting a business visa in Czech Republic, and I've talked about in a number of countries how we use business visas to get access to countries. Well, very often if you want to go somewhere, especially if you want to go there for, say, longer than a year, it's useful to have a company because you can get access to the country via a company, whereas it would be more difficult to otherwise, or at least you'd have fewer options, etc. So let's use an example. If you're going to UAE, yeah, you can get a remote virtual worker program visa for a year, fair enough. That's not necessarily a bad option, but you also could go and you could also set up a company to get a 3-year visa. Well, often that's an easier way to go, often it's a way that works better for you than the alternative. So there is immediately a benefit to having a company if you need one or if it's helpful from an immigration standpoint. And maybe it's not for you, right? It just depends on your situation. Also, when you're doing this, sometimes it's helpful because basically the incentive structure of the country is that they usually are concerned about you taking jobs from locals. And if you have a foreign company that's paying you, that could be your foreign company, right? You set up your own company and your own company is paying you, then you're employed through your own company and you don't have to worry about them being concerned about you kind of working locally. At the same time, you can be in a situation where you can sponsor other people, which is useful, right? So for example, again, UAE, you set up a company, maybe you get 3 visas possibly with that company. And so if you're going to bring in multiple people, well, this can be a fair way to go, okay? That's one thing. The next thing that goes along with that, of course, is that sometimes you want to work in a country, right? So the one case is, hey, I need to get into the country, and so it may be useful. And this goes for investors or digital nomads, really, that having a company may allow you to get in. And in some cases, some people will ask me, they'll say, well, do I need to run business through that company? Often you don't need to. Now, sometimes there's some benefits to it. Sometimes there's some drawbacks. It just depends on your situation, but that's one use case, okay? The second use case is you want to be able to work, but it's hard to get a work permit, okay? This is really, really common. Getting a work permit is probably in most cases the hardest type of visa to get for a country. And again, the reason is that countries generally are trying to protect the jobs of their locals and they don't want you to take those jobs. So if you set up a company, then your company can contract and work even with locals and make money, and you can get paid that way. And that's a great way to gain access to a job market, whereas maybe you wouldn't otherwise. So we use this in situations like Czech Republic, like Slovakia, to some extent in places such as Italy, as in Slovenia, et cetera, right? There's a bunch of different cases where you can do that. You can do it in Canada, where I am today. So that's another option. The third class of problems, I guess, are where we're looking at taxes. Okay, so there's often tax benefits to having a company. Now, is it in your case? It depends. So for example, if there's withholding taxes, maybe you can reduce them using a company. That can be sometimes beneficial. Sometimes you can defer the tax and compound and grow it. So one of the common things for digital nomads would be, say, to form an Estonian company, right? An Estonian company, allows you to invoice clients, and sometimes this is important because sometimes you're in a country where if they pay you directly, they're supposed to withhold socials or things like this. And so if they're paying to your company, then they don't have to do that. So that's one useful thing, right? Sometimes it's helpful for getting payment processing. You often can't get payment processing as an individual, so you can allow your clients to pay you via credit cards. That can be helpful for you. Then you may have some sort of tax benefits where you can defer the tax at that company level for a while, maybe at a zero tax or a lower tax rate than what your regular earned income would be. This is the case a lot with, say, crypto traders, where often the country that they're trading in, usually corporate tax rates are quite a bit lower than personal tax rates, right? And so even if you're ultimately going to pay that personal tax rate, the fact that you can earn it at the corporate level, pay the tax, compound, etc., is going to be helpful. And then on top of that, you have the benefit of being able to deduct expenses. So really quick example of this. Let's say that you're in a country that has a 30% tax rate. Let's say you earn $100,000. If you're spending pre-tax income, what's going to happen is you would take that $100,000, you would subtract 30, you have 70,000. Let's say you have 50,000 in expenses, so you're left with 20,000 at the end of paying the expenses. If you're able to spend after-tax income, right, then, or sorry, that was after-tax income. If you're spending pre-tax income, what happens is you take 100,000, you spend your 50,000, you're down to 50, and then you pay tax on the 50 remaining, so that's 15,000, right? And so 15,000 off of that, you end up with 35,000. So you actually saved yourself 10,000 in tax in that example, right? Which is pretty good. It's like quite an accomplishment. So each of these cases can be, have their different benefits. I would say that usually setting up a company, it does come with some extra costs, right? You're probably talking, around, depending on the country, let's just call it a range of 500 to 2,500. It's actually, in theory, it can be lower. Like in UK, it can be quite a bit lower, but then the top end can be, $5,000 in some places. So maybe it's somewhere in there. But anyway, depending on the country, that's one option. The thing then is that you also have to do separate filings often for that company. So that's going to take you some extra cost. It's going to be a little bit of extra hassle, right? And you're going to go accordingly. If you are operating as a sole operator, places that are good to do that often are US LLCs, are maybe a UK LLP, although it's a little more tricky and a little less common. An Estonian company can be good. Sometimes you would use, there's cases where you maybe use a company in UAE. Sometimes you might use a company, say, for immigration purposes in a place like Panama. You would historically do this, right? So one of these places. Sometimes it's better off just to be a sole trader. And so a sole trader is where you have an unincorporated entity, is what they call it, okay? And so that's generally a useful way to go for some countries. Maybe it's beneficial in a place like Romania. Romania is quite good because you have this as low as 1% tax on revenue. So if you're a consultant or something like that, that's good. It's not so good for investors, but for those types of people. You could maybe do something in Georgia, although banking has gotten harder there, so it makes less sense. And maybe you could do something in Cyprus. So these are a few different options, right? The truth is there's no one size fits all. It depends on your circumstances, depends on what you're trying to accomplish, which is why we work with people to help them out. But those are some loose ideas to explore a little bit if you're in a situation where this might be relevant to you. So I hope that helps. I hope it gives you a basic idea of the scenarios under which you might want it. If you're not going to benefit from one of those things, then clearly don't do it. I guess the last thing is it can have some asset protection benefits, so that could be as well useful for you. If you're wanting to protect yourself, you're doing some business that might have some sort of a risk, and it goes without saying that if you're raising capital, well then of course you kind of need a company. So those would be scenarios. I hope that helps. If you have some questions, please put them in the comments below. Please reach out to me. Again, you can book a call. Give the video a thumbs up. If you'd like to see some other content, would love to hear from you, and I'm going to look forward to seeing you guys on the next video.